Mr. Speaker, I'm shocked that the Prime Minister would say that actions were not taken. He knows full well that we accepted 18. He knows full well that we accepted 18 of the 20 recommendations in the J inquiry and went further, launching a gangs task force that found 550 more perpetrators. That shows that there is still work to be done. In Rotherham alone, there have been over 1,400 victims. Across Oldham, Bradford, Bristol, Rochdale, and dozens more towns, there have been thousands more victims. But no one has joined the dots. No one has the total picture. And it is almost certainly still going on. One victim from Telford, and I know he says that victims have different views. We have different views across this House. But one victim from Telford says she wants a national inquiry because it will hold people accountable in a way that previous inquiries have not. It is very possible to have actions, take on more, and still have a national inquiry. So why won't he listen to victims and launch a national inquiry which would have the power to summon witnesses and make them give evidence under oath?
Mr. Speaker, she says they accepted the recommendations. They didn't act on them. Exactly. One of the central recommendations was mandatory reporting, and it still hasn't been enacted. I called for this 11 years ago. They've been tweeting and talking. We've been acting. Well, Mr. Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition has been an MP, I think, for 8 years. Her party have been in government for 7.5 of those 8 years. She was the Children's Minister. She was the Women's and Equalities Minister. I can't recall her once raising this issue in the House, once calling for a national inquiry. It's only in recent days she's jumped on the bandwagon. Now, Mr. Speaker, in fairness, if I'm wrong about that, and she has raised it, then I invite her to say that now, and I will happily withdraw the remark that she hasn't raised it in this House in the 8 years that she's been here until today.
Kemi Badenoch.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister is being very specific because I have raised this issue. I've raised it in speeches. I've raised it publicly. He knows that as a minister, I would not have been speaking on this specific issue. I was not a Home Office minister. But Mr. Speaker, I will remind him about other victims who came to me who I did help. The victims of the Tavistock scandal who came to me as a minister. I didn't send them away like his safeguarding minister. I made sure, as his Labour Party were calling me transphobic, that we launched the CAS review, which even his health secretary has accepted. So we do right by victims, Mr. Speaker. The reason why a national inquiry is important is because this issue is systemic. It has been involving local and national officials, the police, prosecutors and politicians. He talks about some of the local inquiries, but these interlinked issues cannot be covered by local inquiries alone. In fact, the leaders of the Manchester inquiry resigned because they couldn't get evidence, they couldn't summon witnesses, and not a single person in a position of authority has been held to account. The Prime Minister called for 9 inquiries in the last Parliament. Does he not see that by resisting this one, people will start to worry about a cover-up?
Mr. Speaker, this is an important issue, and we have to focus on the victims and survivors, and it isn't helpful. This sort of lies and misinformation and slinging of mud doesn't help them one bit. Mr. Speaker, she raised a question of a victim with me, and quite right to, and I accept that victims and survivors are in different places on this. Those that I've spoken to are worried about the delay of a further inquiry. The last inquiry took 7 years. That would take us to 2031. Now, these inquiries, amongst the issues that's been raised with me, and if she's been speaking to victims, they'll have raised this with her, is that it's very hard for victims and survivors to come forward to explain what's happened to them. They do not want to be rushed through this process, which is why the last one took 7 years. It's not sensible to suggest that this can be done in a hurry, on the cheap and comprehensively. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, that would take us to, let's say, 2030, 2031. The victims that I've spoken to want action today. I agree with them on that. But what I don't understand, I genuinely don't understand, is why anybody today would vote against the Children Wellbeing Bill, which will protect children who are vulnerable today. It will kill the bill. It will stop those provisions for children exposed at risk today. I implore them, vote for the bill. Don't wreck this in this misguided way.
This is a very, very important issue that does matter to the country. It matters to all our constituents. I want to make sure they can hear what's being said by the Leader of the Opposition and the Prime Minister of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, this is one of the worst scandals in recent British history. But how are they going to explain to their constituents that obeying his whip is more important than doing the right thing?
She's right to say it's one of the worst scandals. It's terrible. That's why I acted on it. Her recently acquired view that it's a scandal, having spent a lot of time on social media over Christmas, not once in 8 years did she stand here and say what she's just said. Not once in 8 years. They didn't act on the recommendations. They want a national inquiry. We had a national inquiry, the J inquiry, the J report. 20 recommendations, not a single one implemented. Not a single one implemented. And she said you can do two things at once. You can't kill the bill this afternoon, wreck that bill, and protect children. Mr. Speaker, there was a dreadful case of Sarah Sharif that everybody will remember. This was the girl taken out of school and abused by an abuser. The bill this afternoon fixes that gap. And I know, I'm looking across, I know there are honourable members on the benches opposite who know very well that what's in this bill is necessary, that it's the right thing to do, and that would want to vote for this bill. I urge them to think twice about following this short-sighted, misguided, bandwagon-jumping approach of the non-leadership of the Leader of the Opposition. I urge them to.